contact you tomorrow.
I'm a few blocks away. You don't need electricity to walk.
You're fading. Hang in there, buddy. We'll get through this.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here. We're covering this, and everyone out there who's watching, wherever you might be. Today I'm joined by Benjamin Schott with the National Weather Service in New Orleans, and he will, in just a few moments, give you the latest update on Hurricane Ida. Dr. Joe Cantor with the Louisiana Department of Health will speak in a minute on COVID and health considerations as we prepare for and respond to this hurricane. We also have on hand today Chip Klein with the CPRA, General Keith Waddell of the Louisiana National Guard, Colonel Lamar Davis with the Louisiana State Police, and also Secretary Jack Monoxide with the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, and Jim Wascom with GOSEP. And they will be available at the end of the presentation in order to take any questions that you might want to direct to them. I want to start by acknowledging that today is the one-year anniversary of Hurricane Laura. And while much progress has been made, there's still a long road of recovery left as it relates to the recovery from Hurricane Laura, particularly in southwest Louisiana. And here we are today faced with another storm setting its sights on Louisiana, this time southeast Louisiana. We have some very significant updates for you. What I can tell you is Hurricane Ida is rapidly intensifying, and the situation is changing, it seems, by the hour. We now believe that there is a strong likelihood that this will be a Category 4 hurricane at landfall. That's how quickly the storm is developing. I can tell you that I had an opportunity a short while ago to speak with the National Hurricane Center, Ken Graham, and he indicated that the storm is sort of ahead of schedule, meaning they had projected it would be at a certain strength at a certain time, and is beating those projections. And what this means is the rapid intensification is happening as was expected. It's just happening to a greater degree, or at least faster than expected. So we have a very serious situation on our hands, and it's important that everyone take advantage of all the opportunities that you have, all the time that you have to adequately prepare yourself and your family, and make sure that you stay calm and that you do those things that are required to put you and your family in the best possible position to successfully weather the storm. Hurricane Ida is presently projected to make landfall somewhere between Terrebonne and St. Mary parishes on Sunday evening. By tomorrow night, tropical storm force winds will begin to move onto the coast of Louisiana. And so the next 24 hours are very, very important. Now is the time to finish your preparations, and I want to encourage everyone to understand that by nightfall tomorrow night, you need to be where you intend to ride out the storm, and you need to be postured as you would want to be as that storm approaches you. Make sure that you're paying attention to your family, to your pets, to elderly loved ones and neighbors. Last night I was able to send a letter to President Biden requesting a pre-landfall federal emergency declaration. I'm very pleased to announce that he approved it earlier today, and we are very grateful for the fact that he approved it, and he did so very quickly. I was able to speak to the president just a few moments ago, and I will tell you, I was able to thank him personally, but this declaration is a key part of us being able to respond to Hurricane Ida and really to prepare in advance of landfall. Yesterday, as you all probably know, I also issued a state of emergency declaration for the state of Louisiana. And so both my declaration and the federal declaration issued by the president are for the entire state of Louisiana. As it happens, yesterday I was in Lake Charles with Administrator Criswell of FEMA, at the time that we received the weather briefing, 10 o'clock yesterday morning, which was the first time that we really received notice of a forecasted storm that could be a hurricane when it hit Louisiana, and we were able to start our coordinations and communications at that time. Earlier today was with Health and Human Services Secretary Becerra in New Orleans as well, and able to thank him for his disaster medical assistance teams and all of the assets that they had previously sent to Louisiana with respect to the COVID emergency that are going to be much more important now, that they're going to continue to work in their capacity as COVID, but as this storm develops. And then there are additional HHS resources that are being brought to bear right now as it relates to the storm. So I had an opportunity to coordinate with him as well. At this time, I'm going to ask Ben of the National Weather Service to come up and give us all the latest on what is a very serious storm. And then I will come back up and give some additional remarks after that, and we will take questions as well. Ben? Oh, there you are.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon, everyone. Hurricane Ida has quickly developed into a hurricane way ahead of schedule, just like the Governor had mentioned. Right now, all forecasts tend to look at that it will be a pretty strong Category 4 when it makes landfall on the coast of Louisiana sometime on Sunday afternoon or evening. At that time, it's possible that we could have sustained winds getting close to 140 miles per hour with wind gusts close to or in excess of 170 miles per hour. This is stronger than Laura from last year. This will be a life-altering storm for those who aren't prepared and ready to take what Ida is going to throw at us later this weekend. As you can see on the track here, it's going to be crossing across a pristine environmental conditions for a hurricane to continue to develop, if not rapidly develop, which is why we're pretty confident about the Category 4 forecast moving forward for landfall on Sunday. As the Governor mentioned, it looks to hit somewhere there close to the central portion of the coastline and then work its way into the central portion of the state. This is where I think we can remember a little bit about also what Laura did, because I think we'll see some similar conditions here, where when you have a storm moving at around 15 or so miles per hour directly into the center of the state, you are going to have a significant large path of wind damage, trees down, power outages, and concerns from that wind over 100 miles per hour working way inland. And I'll show some graphics to give the exact extent of that kind of push of the wind later on. There are multiple other threats with this storm. A lot of folks will focus on the category, and they should in this case, with it being a Category 4. It does have, obviously a significant wind threat, but there are other significant threats that are life-threatening as well, and I'll kind of work my way through some of those through the rest of the briefing here. As the Governor mentioned, this is the earliest time that we expect to see the beginning of conditions starting to deteriorate. If you notice on the graphic there, it shows it being somewhere late Saturday night into early Sunday morning, spreading into the state. The color part of the graphic there is the percentage that we will see tropical storm force winds. As you can see, almost all of southern and southeastern Louisiana are in excess of 70 or 80% chance for tropical storm winds at least. So this is definitely something for everyone to prepare for. I show this graphic here also to try to remove the I'm only interested in the center line part of the discussion. Again, the impacts on these storms can happen way away from the center and from the eye of this storm. And everyone must understand that and make sure you're prepared for what those impacts may be depending on where you are compared to the center line movement of the storm. Unfortunately, with the time of the new graphics just coming out, I have this just clipped, unfortunately, for southeast Louisiana, but there are hurricane warnings across almost all of southern Louisiana. And you can see some tropical storm just outside the state in Mississippi. The hurricane warnings do extend along the coast just a little bit further to the west, so I apologize for the graphic not showing it there. But it is time for people to start taking action. You know, we are within just that last 24 to 36 hours at most before we're going to see tropical storm force winds taking over most of southern and southeastern Louisiana. When I was talking earlier about the wind threat and how far inland that it can push, everywhere in the purple is what we consider a potential for 110 mile per hour winds. So I want everybody to kind of get a feel for how far inland. That takes us all the way in to southwest Mississippi. So with the speed of the storm coming in and its strength being a fairly strong Category 4, it is possible that we could have winds in excess of 100 miles per hour push all the way from the coast all the way into Mississippi and portions of central Louisiana. And that is something that everybody, including Baton Rouge, Lafayette, you need to be prepared for that possibility this weekend. As you move a little bit further to the east, North Shore area of the New Orleans area there, Covington, Mandeville, Slidell, it's still possible you could see winds gusting from 74 up to over 100 miles per hour. Again, you do not have to be near the center of this storm to have significant impacts. Winds of 100 miles per hour will do significant damage to both trees and possibly the power grid for exposed lines. So for those who are in those areas, I would definitely consider in this time left to make sure that you have consideration for what you would do if you were without power as we move later on in the weekend. Surge is another devastating threat. It's probably one of the #1 killers when it comes to hurricanes and straw hurricanes. So across most of the southern and the southeastern portions of the coastline, we're talking about extreme surge. 10 to 15 feet surge possible from the mouth of Mississippi west to about Morgan City. From Morgan City to Intercoastal City, just a little bit less of that, roughly around 6 to 9, and then 3 to 5 to the Texas line. As you go the other way and you work your way from the eastern portion of the mouth and wrap around the boot up towards the tidal lakes, you can see 7 to 11 on the boot portion of the Louisiana coast, and then in the tidal lakes 4 to 7. So again, the extent of the impacts are going to be far away from where this makes landfall. So for anyone with coastal interests, understand that you will see a significant amount of water move in. And depending on how large the wind field grows to and the movement and speed, these numbers may increase as we move a little bit closer to the storm making landfall. So that is definitely something for folks to watch, because higher amounts like that obviously will bring a much larger amount of risk, especially possible in the tidal lakes area where there may not be a full levee system for everybody to be protected. Rainfall is another huge issue with this storm. We're talking 10 to 15 inches of rainfall over a large portion of southeastern Louisiana. There may be pockets of 15 to 20 plus, depending on the speed and location of these bands setting up. With the rainfall that we're expecting today, that happened already today, and tomorrow, on top of the effects from Ida itself, there could be significant inland river flooding. And so with that, everywhere that you see the purple there across southeast Louisiana is where we're looking for the possibility of extreme flooding to occur. This is right on the edge of the city of New Orleans, so obviously we could have some water problems there, and that'll be something we'll have to consider as well as things set up. But I just want to highlight again that it's not just the wind threat here that could do most of the devastation. It's the water threat that's usually one that ends up being the biggest killer. And unfortunately, a lot of people tend to try to move around when they start to get worried or scared as the storm starts to come in, and this is probably the worst time to move, especially with this coming in on Sunday evening, Sunday night. As you go in the nighttime, you do not want to be trying to drive around when we're seeing heavy rains that could be creating all sorts of river or flooding that could cause your car to go off the road and into water, and then unfortunately put you at severe risk for loss of life. So just a quick overview of the threats here. The confidence is fairly high on the track. The track really hasn't budged for the last day or two. We are becoming more and more certain when it comes to the intensity. That Cat 4 at landfall looks pretty much like it's a really solid forecast now. And with that, all the threats of a very large storm with a little bit larger wind field are in play with the surge and the heavy rainfall. The one other thing that I did not mention is the possibility of tornadoes as well. And so as this comes on shore, especially on the eastern side of the shore, which will encompass much of southeast Louisiana and portions of coastal Mississippi and southwest Mississippi, they'll be under the gun for a possible tornadic spin-ups, which is very normal for landfalling hurricanes. So there are multiple threats. There are multiple things for people to be watching and keeping their eye on and making sure that they're prepared for. Because again, I'll start off with the same comment that I started with, I believe, unfortunately, this is going to be a life-altering storm for many people. And so the actions that you do now are what can prepare you to make sure that you can successfully navigate what Ida is going to throw at us. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. And I don't know about you, but that's a very sobering assessment of what we can expect with Hurricane Ida. And I guess the biggest challenge is not just the strength of the storm, but how quickly it is approaching after its initial formation. And we don't have the normal time that we typically have in order to prepare for a hurricane of this magnitude, and that's why it's important that everybody take advantage of every minute that you have. We have announced that state offices in 38 parishes will be closed on Saturday, August the 28th through Monday, August the 30th. And we may be announcing additional closures on Sunday, but we know these will be closed Saturday through Monday. And I'm going to go through those for just a minute. Acadia, Allen, Ascension, Assumption, Avoyles, Beauregard, Calcasieu, Cameron, East Baton Rouge, East Feliciana, Evangeline, Iberia, Iberville, Jefferson Davis, Jefferson, Lafayette, Lafourche, Livingston, Orleans, Plaquemines, Point Capee, Rapides, St. Bernard, St. Charles, St. Helena, St. James, St. John the Baptist, St. Landry, St. Martin, St. Mary, St. Tammany, Tangipahoa, Terrebonne, Vermilion, Vernon, Washington, West Baton Rouge, and West Feliciana. I want to remind everyone, please do not drive once conditions deteriorate. That's why it's important that you do everything possible in advance and get to the place where you want to ride out the storm. If for some reason you absolutely have to get on the road, make sure that you are mindful of debris, down power lines, and flooded roadways. Do not drive around DOTD barricades. And if you see standing water, please turn around. Don't drown. I encourage you to use 511la.org or the 511LA app to see what state routes are open or closed because of the weather or other causes. And if necessary, find alternate routes before you actually get underway. DOTD also partners with Google Maps and Waze, which are also travel resources that are especially beneficial in times like these. The CPRA is tracking 692 gates across the coastal zone. As of earlier today, a total of 182 of those are closed. We are anticipating the full closure of major floodgates in the hurricane risk reduction system around the greater New Orleans area, the Morganza to the Gulf, and the LaRose to Golden Meadow. We are aware of voluntary and/or mandatory evacuations in 5 parishes. These orders differ depending upon where you live in the parish. So if you live in Jefferson, Lafourche, Orleans, Plaquemines, or Tangipahoa, please refer to your local officials for instructions on evacuations. And whoever you are, and wherever you live or wherever you happen to be, make sure you're paying close attention to your local officials, especially the offices of emergency preparedness and parish presidents and so forth, and follow their guidance. Currently, the Louisiana National Guard has over 1,600 guardsmen on duty preparing for this hurricane, but also doing all of their normal COVID operations as well. I've authorized General Waddell to activate the entirety of the Louisiana National Guard. There will be more than 5,000 soldiers available to respond. Search and rescue assets are currently staged in 13 parishes. We do have 64 high-water vehicles, 60 boats, and 13 helicopters ready to support and assist the citizens of Louisiana. The Department of Transportation and Development, led by Secretary Sean Wilson and his team, they've mobilized their high water signs and barricades and other equipment that may be needed to address issues related to the storm. This equipment will be utilized when it is appropriate to do so. Through an existing contract, DOTD currently has more than 70 coach buses and 20 Parrot Transit smaller buses in Louisiana. They are staged at 2 vehicle staging areas, one in the New Orleans area, one in the Lafayette area. By tomorrow morning, we will have a total of 125 buses staged in Louisiana. The majority will be at the New Orleans vehicle staging area. This afternoon, just a little while ago, I did direct that the Saints preseason game with the Cardinals be canceled. Now that we've had update on the weather forecast and the severity of the storm is increasing, and knowing how valuable every minute is for people to be preparing for this storm, I did not believe it was appropriate for there to be an NFL preseason game taking place on Saturday afternoon, knowing that we're asking people by dark tomorrow night or bedtime tomorrow night, however you want to say it, that they be postured and located wherever they need to be and how they need to be to ride out the storm. It's never too early to start talking about post-storm safety as well. And I will remind you that in Hurricane Laura, we actually lost more people after the storm than we did during the storm to things like generator safety because of carbon monoxide poisoning, to people who were using chainsaws and on roofs and that sort of thing, and heat-related issues as well. So everyone, please be mindful of this, and there is a very good likelihood that for some period of time, a considerable part of our state will be without power. Not that we're not doing everything we can to make sure that we can respond quickly. I can tell you there are already 5,000 linemen in the state ready to respond and almost 12,000 more postured to come in when they're called. But there's going to be a period of time, if the past is any indication at least, where many Louisianans will be without power. Many of those will rely on generators. Please make sure that you have those located well away from your home, at least 20 feet, not in a crawl space, not next to a window, and certainly not indoors or in a garage. And when you refuel the generator, let it cool off for at least 20 minutes before you do that. Finally, I know that the fact that we're still in a pandemic makes this much more difficult for everyone as we prepare for and respond to this hurricane. But the pandemic isn't going to leave just because it's more inconvenient. And so we just have to deal with it. And I'm going to ask Dr. Cantor to come up. He will briefly go over today's numbers as well as some other safety tips, because as we have, one of the concerns that I have is we're going to have tens or hundreds of thousands of people moving around Louisiana at a time when our percent positivity, although it's improved, it's still well above 10%. There's an awful lot of COVID out there, and transmission remains too high, cases and hospitalizations. And if anybody has been paying attention to the death reports this week, you'll see that we've had some of the highest numbers at any point in the pandemic. And so I'm going to ask him to come up and go through some of the COVID-related information. I will then come back up, make a few additional comments, and then I'll take your questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Governor. So, as you heard from Ben from the Weather Service, this is a powerful and dangerous storm. It's moving a little bit faster than we had thought it would be, which means that we have a little bit less time to prepare. So that's the first message to folks. Your normal timeline of preparedness for a hurricane has been cut down a little bit now. So take stock, make use of the time tonight and tomorrow morning to prepare, as the Governor just said. We are thankful that our COVID numbers have softened just a little bit over the past week in this really unprecedented fourth surge. We have reported out an additional 3,428 new cases of COVID today. That's on 37,520 tests. And today there are now 2,684 COVID patients in hospital beds throughout the state. That number is down just over 300 count over the past week, which is encouraging because we were at a place a week ago where the hospitals just could not take anymore. So we are thankful for that, but as the Governor said, the level of COVID out there, the amount of transmission out there, your risk, your chances of being exposed to and infected with COVID remain higher today than they have been at any point in the pandemic leading up to the beginning of this fourth surge. Percent positivity has gone down a couple points from our peak, but now it's at 14.1, which is still very, very high. There's a lot of COVID out there. There's a lot of risk out there. And as folks think through what their hurricane plans will look like and their contingencies, they need to take stock of how to keep themselves and their family safe from COVID. In most circumstances, that's going to mean limiting themselves to their family unit as much as possible, and when not possible, masking and distancing. This has been a difficult week. We reported earlier in the week our single highest fatality count from COVID to date at 139 deaths. We also, unfortunately, reported out 2 pediatric COVID deaths this week, one of which was in an infant less than 1 year old. There's still a lot of risk out there. This storm is not the only risk out there. COVID increases the risk. Please take stock of that. Please incorporate that into your hurricane plans. Again, if you need to be in an environment where you're mingling with people beyond your family unit, the things that will keep you safe from a COVID perspective are masking and distancing. Please keep that in mind. I would also like to ask people, although our hospitalization census from COVID has gone down a little bit, it still is higher than it was in any of our 3 prior surges. The hospitals are still very busy. The hospitals are still in their own contingency plans. Many hospitals are still postponing elective procedures. Please avoid emergency departments unless you need it throughout this storm. If you're sick, by all means, go to an ER, but if your condition doesn't warrant an emergency department, please avoid the ERs throughout the storm, because we're trying our best to preserve their capacity for what they have on their hands now and anything else that they might have to deal with throughout the storm. If you have special medical needs, including electricity dependency or oxygen dependency, do what you need to do right now to prepare. Contact your vendor, make sure you have your supplies, stock up, be prepared. If you need assistance with any of those, particularly with oxygen, and you don't know where to go, start with 211. There are oxygen pickup points throughout the state. 211 will have the most up-to-date listing. If you need assistance with life-saving medical supplies that you and your family require, and you don't know where to go, 211 is the first place to go for that. The majority of the COVID testing and vaccine sites throughout the state are ramping down right now. Most south of I-10 have already closed, and the remainder will close at around 5 p.m. today. So please keep up with those sites throughout the weekend. There won't be much activity of that throughout the weekend. If you already had your first dose of COVID vaccine and you were scheduled to get a second dose this weekend, it's likely that will not happen, but that's okay. You should reschedule that second dose appointment for as soon as possible after this storm rolls through. We would like people to get their second doses on the specific date that they're supposed to, 21 days after the first for Pfizer, 28 days after the first for Moderna. But if that's not possible with the storm, it's okay to do it later. It's okay to do it 1 week later. It's okay to do it 3 weeks later. Just remember to do it later. So if you have to postpone your second vaccine dose appointment because of the storm, get that rescheduled as soon as possible. It still is beneficial to you. I want to talk for a second about preventable deaths during hurricanes, and the governor just mentioned this. We want to do all we can to limit preventable deaths during a storm. Some deaths are not going to be preventable, but many deaths are. During a storm, the number one preventable death is from motor vehicle accidents, particularly involving high water. Last year's storm season, we had 42 deaths, 2 of which were from motor vehicle accidents in high water. And during the floods this past May, 4 of our 5 deaths were from people driving through high water. If you don't need to be on the road during the storm, don't. And do what you need to do now to enable you not to be on the road then. Once the winds get above a certain speed, first responders are not coming for you. Fire, EMS, and police are staying put after the winds get above a certain speed, which means if you get into an accident, you're by yourself until the wind slows down. And if you get into an accident involving water, they might not be able to get to you at all. So please don't put yourself or your family or our first responders in harm's way. If you don't absolutely need to be on the roadway during a storm, don't. Stay home. Once the storm passes, as the governor mentioned, there are a couple other ways that we see preventable deaths every single storm, every single season. Number one is from unsafe generator use and poisoning by carbon monoxide. During last storm season, we had 9 deaths from carbon monoxide related to unsafe generator usage. Carbon monoxide is silent. You don't know it's there until you or your family dies. If you do need a generator, it always must be used outside. It always must be kept well away from any air intakes. Don't keep it in the garage. Don't keep it in your house. Don't keep it just below an open window or an open air vent. And never use a stove to heat your house or to provide any other type of cooling. The other preventable death that we see every storm season is heat exhaustion. During last storm season, we had another 9 people die from heat exhaustion. So if you have to do work on your house after the storm rolls through, try and avoid the peak of the day. Stay hydrated and don't push yourself. It's not worth it. To remind folks again, this is a fast-moving storm, which means you have less time than normal to get yourself and your family prepared. If you're going to be evacuating and you're going to be around people beyond your immediate household, please mask and please distance. It's not worth putting your family in jeopardy of getting COVID because of this evacuation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cantor. While we're talking about COVID, I'm going to go ahead and address the public health emergency that you all know is set to expire next week. And we have started to see some improvement in our data. That literally started exactly 2 weeks after the current mask mandate was put into place in terms of reducing percent positivity of our tests, cases, hospitalizations, which have improved by a total of 15%. But even with these improvements, we are still much worse off than we ever were in our first 3 surges. And none of the gains that we have made are irreversible. And that is especially true since 100% of all COVID cases in Louisiana today are attributable to the Delta variant, which is much more transmissible and potentially more virulent as well. And so with all that we're going to be dealing with next week, and because we are preparing for and responding to a major storm during COVID, we have every potential to lose whatever momentum we've been able to get with respect to those numbers that I just mentioned. I can go ahead and announce today that our next public health emergency will maintain the indoor mask mandate in public spaces for those vaccinated and unvaccinated. It'll be the exact same mandate that we currently have in place. We know that these mitigation measures work. We know that the vaccines are safe and effective. We're going to continue to do those things that are required in order to make sure that we can preserve as much hospital capacity as possible to deliver life-saving care. So as it relates to the hurricane again, remember that while we're going to have lots of people, lots of boats and helicopters, and we're going to do urban search and rescue just as soon as we possibly can, everyone is encouraged to have 3 days worth of supplies on hand. That's the rule of thumb. The first 72 hours is on you, and spend your time between now and the arrival of the hurricane to make sure you and your family can withstand 72 hours. If you are in a difficult spot and we can possibly get to you sooner than that, you know that we will. But you won't be the only one in difficulty. And so you can't count on that response being there as fast as you might like. So remember, the first 72 hours is on you. And do what you can now and in the immediate aftermath of the hurricane to control as best as possible the spread of COVID-19. That means wear your mask. It means distance where possible, wash your hands, and so forth. So we have some time to prepare, not as much as we would like, but preparation is key. Panicking is the exact opposite of what we should be doing right now. If you haven't done so, it is not too late to visit getagameplan.org, and you will get a list of the things that you should be focused on between now and tomorrow night. Closely monitor your local weather and your local officials. Please do as you are directed. Keep your phones charged. And if you want to sign up for updates from my office, you can text IDA. You can text IDA to 67283. And I know we've been through this many times before. That doesn't make it easier. And nobody should assume that this storm is going to be just like any other storm. They're all different. They all have their personalities. But this one has the potential, the likelihood to be very serious and very strong, potentially catastrophic for some. So let's prepare. Let's pray for what comes our way. Let's be good neighbors to one another. So check on that elderly couple next door or across the street. Call your mom and your dad or your grandparents. See if there's something you can do to help them tomorrow to get in a better position to withstand the hurricane. And with that, we will take a few questions, and you can direct questions to myself, to Ben Schott, to Joe Cantor, or to any of these public officials over here to my right. Yes, sir. Yep. So where evacuations have been ordered, most are voluntary. There are some mandatory. Those individuals should be looking for shelter and guidance from their local officials. We obviously have state shelters that we are setting up that will be operational as needed. If individuals want information about state shelters, they should call 211. I can tell you we will focus on North and Northwest Louisiana based on the track of the hurricane that you just saw for our sheltering, and we always have medical special needs shelters that are open as well. But the first thing people should do if they need shelters is to contact their Office of Emergency Preparedness in the parish where they live and take instruction from them. But if they do need sheltering that their parish isn't providing, you can call 211 and get that information. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
So obviously we have, I'm going to assume, more people in the hospital than we normally do going into a hurricane. Have you talked to the hospitals, and is there any things you can do to mitigate concerns about that?
Well, we have. And the other thing is we actually have contingency plans that in certain scenarios, and perhaps not this one, where we would actually evacuate hospitals in certain coastal areas. That isn't possible. We don't have any place to bring those patients, not in-state, not out-of-state. So we have been talking to individual hospitals and to the Louisiana Hospital Association about them making all the preparations possible, and of course we provide resources upon request to make sure that their generators are working, that they have way more water on hand than normal, that PPE be on hand in the amounts that they might need, and then to look at things that aren't necessarily things that we would typically experience. So, you know, what is it that's necessary in order to make sure that your efforts with respect to COVID can continue uninterrupted? And then you start looking at things like oxygen supplies and so forth. And so we're working with them on a full range of issues, and we're encouraging them, just like we're encouraging individuals, to make use of every single minute to be prepared for this storm. But evacuations are just not possible. And so, you know, we're having to work, for example, with the Nursing Home Association too, so that they can implement their point-to-point evacuations, those that are evacuating, because there have been times in the past where the more acute patients in nursing homes might end up in a hospital if something like this happens, where the hospitals don't have room for them either. So the implications of having a Category 4 storm with a southeast strike while our hospitals are full are beyond what most people normally contemplate, and quite frankly beyond what our normal plans are, which is why we've been working so hard today to fully coordinate. And I was on the phone earlier today with the president, and he had the FEMA administrator in the office with him, and I just told her, I said, be prepared to receive emergency requests for supplies that you wouldn't normally get. And we went through what some of those might be, because this situation really, and we use this word a lot, unprecedented, unique, but this one really is. And so we were able to have that conversation, and certainly I expect that they will work as hard as they can to provide whatever those needs might turn out to be. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have plans with certain strikes to evacuate hospitals. That is not something that we would do in this situation anyway, at least not those within the hurricane risk reduction system. If you had one or two small hospitals that are much further south, you know, potentially, but it's not something that we would do for this storm. But we always have those contingencies in place. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Last year during Laura, the people who were evacuated in efforts to avoid congregate studies. Is there any sort of similar plan this time, and is that
Sure.
even possible in your district?
It's possible. There are plans, and we expect that if we have to shelter enough individuals, that's what we would do. It's another part of the conversation I had with the president today. Would be on the need to quickly shift to non-congregant sheltering, which means hotels. Now, we're already in contact with hotels all across Louisiana to figure out where there's vacancy, and we are modifying our shelter capacity to reflect the realities of COVID. And so our shelter capacities are not what they would normally be, although we can still shelter many thousands of people. But even if we were to do that, we would as quickly as possible transition away from that mass sheltering to non-congregant shelters as we are able. So it absolutely is part of our planning, and it's something that we would want to execute if it becomes necessary. Again, it's just one of the realities of doing this in a pandemic, such as the one that we're currently experiencing. The good news is we have experience doing it. And at the height last year, we actually had 20,000 individuals who were in non-congregant shelters, actually spread across 2 states. So we know how to do this. I hope and pray we don't have to do it anywhere near that extent, but if we do, we will. It won't be as easy simply because last year when Laura hit, there were many hotels that were practically empty. There are far fewer hotels in that situation today. And so cobbling together the room space could be a little more difficult, and that makes it logistically harder if you have to spread your shelter population across more hotels than would be necessary otherwise. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that in the conversation with the President, you said be prepared to receive emergency requests that are out of the norm. What would be requested from typical?
Well, so for example, we've actually had over the last couple of weeks some disruptions, and they were primarily related to certain vendors with respect to oxygen. And so the number of patients who need oxygen, both in the hospital and at home right now, is greatly increased over what it would have been before the pandemic. And what we don't want to do is to create a situation where people start running low on their oxygen, start going to hospitals that are already full and extremely busy. And so making sure that we have a number of oxygen canisters on hand, which, by the way, we're already working on for ourselves, but you never know how long this event could last. We might need additional help bringing some oxygen canisters into the state, getting those positioned so that individuals don't have to unnecessarily go to the hospital, as Dr. Canner was saying. That's something that we really need to avoid. So that's just one example. But the truth is, we can't sit here today and know exactly how all of this is going to play out. So look, thank you very much. We will let you all know tomorrow when we will have another press event. I can tell you we will have a unified command group meeting in the morning. We're going to take a hard look at the 10 o'clock forecast. Everybody out there should be doing the same thing tonight and tomorrow. And please make use of all the time that you have between now and tomorrow night to prepare for this storm, for yourself and for your family. Take it seriously. This is going to be a very serious storm. You saw the Category 4 winds that we are anticipated, the storm surge that in areas could get up to 15 feet and so forth. And also, when you start talking about rain that in localized areas could approach 20 inches, I mean, this can pose a lot of difficulties, a lot of threats and dangers, I should say. So let's all do what we can to be prepared, and then let's respond as intelligently as we can and as safely as we can and as quickly as we can to our fellow Louisianans who will be in need. So we will let you know when our next press conference is. Again, let's prepare and let's pray. And thank you.
can we find skeletons of other whales? Whales are